Well, hello everyone. Happy Hump Day. It is Wednesday, December 9th. Hope wherever you are in the world that we're finding you in a good space, healthy, and we've got a really, I think, not only an important topic to discuss today around digital transformation, but one that is definitely one of the biggest topics for CIOs now and going into 2021. Before we get into what today's about and before I introduce today's panelists, I just want to make sure we're going to give everybody just a minute so that as people arrive, they can get settled in. But while we're waiting for people to arrive, I just got a couple of things I'll let you know. First and foremost, as you've joined, you should have access to 5 different handouts. These handouts are in the form of a PDF. So we've got a case study on the value of collaboration, as well as a white paper on the digital future being here. It's believe that's just an article that you wrote. And we've got a couple of ebooks as well, one on remote work, one on creating great corporate cultures, and another on using how remote teams can use virtual whiteboards. So just a bunch of different assets that we thought you might find interesting. So those handouts should be something that you could download now. Just also to let you know, as people are coming in, we are recording the webinar. And so if you aren't able to stay for the whole thing, you most certainly can access the replay. We will send the replay to everyone a little bit later today. And if you aren't able to join us, you're not hearing this right now, but you will also be able to watch the replay as well as get the additional materials as handouts. So we'll wait just a few minutes. Looks like we've got a large onslaught of people joining. A couple of other housekeeping items that I think will be important to note is that for some of you who've been attending our webinars or our panel discussions, you know that, well, actually one of the things that we're doing newly that we haven't done before is a survey on the webinar or the panel. So you'll receive that survey after today's panel discussion. So please do let us know what you're thinking of the content, if there are some other items, topics that you think you'd like for us to explore in the new year. Again, that webinar survey will come out after the panel discussion today. All right, so other things that might be worth noting, and then we'll get started here in just a second with some introductions, is we've got a couple of other panel discussions coming up. We've got one next week on design. Good design is great for business. So we've got different executives and designers who will be helping us talk about your leading remote design teams and what you need to do to be able to keep them productive and hitting business goals. So, and we also have another webinar coming up around understanding Bluescape and what it does. So we'll have a little bit more information on that. I see that it's 3 minutes after the hour, and I'm a man who likes to start and end on time because I know that everybody has only a finite amount of time. So we don't want to, as I like to say, we don't want to punish the punctual, if you will. So for those of you, hopefully you can see our panelists today. We've got 2 delightful gentlemen who are going to be answering all of my very hard-hitting questions, very journalistic in nature. So hopefully I'll be on for that. Actually, we've got Tejas Todad. Tejas, did I say your last name right? I don't think we talked about saying your last name.
It's difficult. It's Tejas Totare.
Totally. Okay, I totally messed that up, Tejas. So Tejas is the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer at Reuter Finn, which is a global PR firm. He has a master's degree in computer science and an engineering background. He leads the charge at Reuter Finn to identify, experiment with, and develop new strategic and data-informed options for the company and its clients at the intersection of emerging technologies and the future of communications industry. And he has nearly 15 years experience delivering award-winning digital communication campaigns that span many different verticals, from healthcare to sciences to technology. Tejas, welcome. Glad that you could be here with us.
Thank you, Sean. And hello and good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone who's joining us from around the world. And hello, Juan.
And speaking of Juan, we have Juan
Nice to
Bettencourt,
see you.
Juan Bettencourt is the CEO of Humantelligence, the world's leading culture management and AI software for recruiting for best fit. He was most recently voted a top 40 global HR tech influencer by Digital HR Tech magazine. Congratulations, Juan. For a decade, he was a partner at Korn Ferry International and Heidrick & Struggles, and CEO founder of his own successful executive recruiting firm, Gonza Executive Search. As a top executive search consultant, he has placed CIOs within the advertising, retail, restaurant, and hospitality industries, including companies like Publicis Group, Polo Ralph Lauren, Massage Envy, which I think we all could certainly use some massages these days, release some of that stress, right? Hardee's, Carl's Jr. I think Hardee's, I don't know that they use the name Hardee's here in California. I think it's Carl's Jr., I think, right? As well as Miller's, Ale Outlets, Burlington, Coat Factory, and DSW, where we all get our fantastic shoes. Welcome, Juan.
Thank you very much. And nice to see you, Tejas, as well.
All right, so for those of you who may have joined just a little bit late, a couple things for you to know. We are recording this, as well as there are some handouts that we thought you might enjoy. Those handouts should be easily downloadable for you. Also, as we go through the panel discussion, you'll notice on your control panel, there's an area that says questions. So if you have a question that you would like for me to ask the panelists, please type in those questions, and then our team who are hidden behind the scenes will actually help me ask those questions as we go through the panel discussion. I like to make sure your questions are answered as we go through the discussion, just because, yeah, well, you know, if you're asking the question, I want to make it timely. It looks like, Juan, we lost your video as well as audio. So this is live, people. This is what happens. Oh, he's back. All right. All right, gentlemen, are you ready? Thumbs up. Great. All right. So here's the first question. You know, in March of this year, as we all are very abundantly clear, we went into a sudden lockdown where organizations, or specifically IT, had to support organizations' sudden pivot to remote work. Now, as we move into 2021 and the mandates are still in place, you know, it's really an opportunity for IT and CIOs to think about what have we learned, and as we move forward, what do we need to do differently? So my question is this: given this environment, what do CIOs and their teams need to do to improve how they support a distributed hybrid workforce? And Tejas, we'll start with you, and then Juan, definitely to you after that.
So I think the biggest learnings from the past few months really have been the two verticals which I want to focus on are security and collaboration. Because I think if you look at the initial months of pandemic, you had the whole issue of even a platform like Zoom, which is built for video conferencing, had a huge security issue with Zoom bombing trending, as you know. And then when you think of collaboration, that was another major issue, because a lot of people had never used virtual collaboration workspaces before, and all of a sudden they were introduced to the idea of virtual collaboration, and they had to adapt. That theme is going to kind of continue through into at least the first half of 2021, where security and collaboration are going to be the two pillars which CIOs are going to have to support, and they're going to have to do. They're going to have to keep up, because the level of threats are getting more and more complex, as you know. And while applications are keeping up, there's still the standard portfolio of applications which a CIO has to deal with has more than quadrupled over the last 6 to 8 months or so, and that's going to keep increasing. So I think in order to kind of align with the next 6 months or so, it's really going to be focused on what are the immediate needs of the workforce, as some of them might actually start coming back. We still don't know how much of that is going to happen, but that is a reality where you are actually going to have a hybrid workforce, which is going to be hybrid, both working from home and ones that are permanently remote, as well as ones which are actually wanting to come back and work from office. So how do you kind of deal with that? The question really comes, it boils down to what is it that you want to serve? So if it is collaboration that you want to kind of focus on, what are the key applications that have done the job for you in the past 6 months, and do they have the chops to support you in this more and more distributed workforce kind of environment, which becomes even more complex as some people want to come back. On the security front, it really is being proactive and identifying what are the threats that are upcoming, or what are the threats that are on the horizon as you kind of grow your portfolio to add more applications, because that's something that's not going to stop. You're going to have more applications coming into your portfolio in Q1, in Q2, and so on.
Yeah, I think you made a very interesting point. And when I was talking with our chief technology officer, one of the things that he noted was that in collaboration, virtual collaboration, there's a lot of intellectual property, which, organizations definitely don't want that to be compromised. And in one way, he was saying that IP is even more important from a data perspective in comparison to like HR related data. So Juan, I want to pose the same question to you. What do CIOs and their teams need to do to improve how they support hybrid or distributed teams as we move into the new year?
So I want to mention 5 things, and I'll touch on each one quickly. And by the way, first, Tejas nailed it on security collaboration. Clearly those are the big ones. The first thing I think CIOs need to understand is who's my stakeholder in the organization, understanding the different hybrid and remote needs of different functional groups, because the support you give and the technology tools you give to a sales organization that's working remote, which you probably already have been supporting because most of them are remote, is a very different new demand than the marketing team that now has to do their job remote, or corporate people in finance and accounting. And so you have to look at the different parts of the organization, because what you'll be supporting is going to become much more complex, and what tools you use will be different for each group, because they all have different, day-to-day tasks where technology will or will not support it. Second, this technology that's going to connect people, Tejas nailed it in that you're going to be evaluating a lot more technologies than you were in the past, and more quickly. And so I think the second thing is creating a process to evaluate many more systems in a short amount of time. I run a software company called Humantelligence, and I remember it used to be 2016, 17, 18, the CIOs that we would speak to had this very stiff 1-year roadmap, and if you didn't get in the right window, you could never sell into them, because they got their budget in January, February, March, or approved in Q4, got their budget started to work in Q1, and if you weren't in that window, well, guess what? CIOs set it and forget it for the next 12 months. Enter COVID. You can't just say, oh, we've already set our strategy and our path, we're not going to do anything. No, Agile as a process, not for developing software, but for evaluating a plethora of systems and getting them up and running even when they weren't in your roadmap, that's going to be a key skill set and way of working for CIOs. Third, the time frame. 6 months ago, remote was going to be a 3-month thing. And then it was going to be a 6-month thing. And then it was, okay, we're all going to come back to work in 9 months. And now people are thinking, oh gosh, we're going to stay remote for a long time. And now there's the hybrid. This kind of zigzag, what the company needs me to support as a CIO, is kind of mind-boggling in what you need to support and what you don't, right? And for example, retail restaurants. Do we bring IT to support curbside delivery and invest a lot of money in that, knowing that maybe it's not going to be curbside next year? So maybe we don't invest in the most coolest technologies. So the time frame and understanding that impact on decisions will make or break CIOs. Fourth, change management. CIOs have never had to deal with change management as much as they will now with remote work and working hybrid. So that's a fourth thing. I'll talk, there's a question later I'll extrapolate. And fifth, and this is where my company, Humantelligence, has a plugin. It's not good enough to just check the box and say we have video conference technology. we have a collaboration tool like Microsoft Teams or Slack. That doesn't mean people will use it. It doesn't mean people will get what they need out of it. There's a component of both change management as well as plugins like Humantelligence, which allows companies on Slack or Microsoft Teams not only to connect, but a plugin where it tells you the culture and the insights on how better to communicate. So looking for unique new solutions that can help that resonance between two people when they don't see each other. If you can somehow get everyone to still relate and resonate from a distance through IT, that will lead to the winners in this marketplace versus the losers.
So definitely we're going to pick up the topic of culture change and the CIO's role with that. You mentioned something, Juan, though, that I want to just kind of pick up on. You mentioned that CIOs really need to be more agile in these very dynamically changing environments. So with that in mind, what guidance can you give to CIOs to make sure that they are being agile enough to align business goals with technology investments for distributed teams? So Juan, do you want to kind of embellish on that a little bit?
Can I pass this to Tejas, because he probably has more experience in that specific question. I'll pass on that.
Sure.
Sure.
Right.
So I think just to kind of take a step back, I think Juan, you nailed it really when you talk about adaptability and flexibility, and that's why I had a big smile on my face, because that's something which I have seen, not in my case obviously, because we come from a different background, as you know, from a career path standpoint. I pivoted to communications about 10 years ago because I saw a big white space for tech leadership over here. But I see that with a lot of the clients, and this has been a recurring theme which not only the workforce, but also the CIOs have had to adapt. Thankfully, a lot of them have actually adapted, and we have seen this culture change happen among our clients because they realize that this is something which is no longer a nice to have, it is something which is a must have. And I think that's a big driver of the change from what I see, at least from an outside in. From an inside out, I think HR has a very significant role to play, and something which we have as an organization at Root2Fin, we have been able to drive, and it's really the CIO and the CHRO or the director of HR, whoever you call it, working hand in hand to have this culture change permeate through the organization. An example of this really at Root2Fin, we have these weekly town halls, all agency town halls, where we have everyone from the US and from our London office join us. And what we have tried to do over the past few months or so now is to try and introduce a new piece of technology for interaction. So it might be a small little thing, such as doing distributed polls and getting user input, not through Zoom, but through something like Poll Everywhere, for instance, and that little piece of innovation, if you want to call it, sparks a germ of idea in someone, and it really democratizes the thought process. So in many ways, it reduces the pressure on the CIO to always come up with the smartest ideas, and it pushes the audience in such a way that it no longer is a passive entity, but is more actively looking, because it sees an opportunity to partake in this process of engagement, in this process of information exchange. And quite frankly, there is this whole phenomenon of Zoom fatigue, as we know, and there is this whole phenomenon of people not feeling more tired when they are on a webcam for the whole day, as opposed to being in the workplace. That really calls for more and more investigation into applications which fuel engagement without having the fatigue element. So I know I kind of touched on a lot of topics, but in a nutshell, I think it really is incumbent upon the HR and the CIO collectively to work on the culture change aspect of it, as to how they can kind of permeate this change through the organization.
So if I'm hearing what you're saying, Tejas, it's if companies are when companies make these investments in technology, a big element to that investment is looking at culture change and really making sure there's a plan around that to be able to help increase the adoption and usability and usage of the technology that helps facilitate work when people are working remotely. So Juan, this is really kind of in your wheelhouse, especially with what you do at Humantelligence. So what do CIOs need to rethink in how they approach culture change in the context of digital transformation? Because as you know, digital transformation isn't just about working remotely. There are many aspects of it, and so that's a pretty big influence on culture change. So what do CIOs need to be thinking about and how they approach culture change?
Sorry, I was on mute. So as they approach culture change, again, I mentioned change management before. All of you should pick up the latest copy of HBR, Harvard Business Review, and any 2 or 3 change management cover stories articles they have. They do about 2 a year. Just at a high level, go read those articles. You will not succeed in this culture change to a remote work culture if you don't grasp the concepts and understand what the pros and cons and pitfalls are and get the tips from people who have done it before you. Learning by doing is not a successful model for culture change and change management. Now, specifically culture, let me just define it. Culture is not doing an engagement survey. So I think a lot of CIOs and heads of HR make the mistake to think that if they know if their employees are happy or not happy, that means they know their culture. The reality is you could have Apple and Microsoft with both very high employee satisfaction scores, 60%, love this job, love my boss, love the company, recommend it to a friend, I want my children to work here, 30%, it's a job, pays the bills, and 10% engagement survey results at Apple and Microsoft saying, I hate my boss, I hate this company, I'm going to quit. Just because they have the exact same engagement survey doesn't mean that they have anything to do with each other culture-wise. Culture is not if you have happy or unhappy employees. Culture is, do you have the right people, okay, with the right psychometrics, the right behaviors, the right motivators, as well as the right work styles, the way they get things done to deliver on the promise of your strategy and objectives as a company and your mission. That's culture, and it's 3 things. Again, to remember BMW, every CIO should know this. Just like there's 3 letters for CIO, you should all know BMW, behaviors, motivators, and work styles. You need to find tools in the marketplace, we are just one of many, that measure those things for your employees. Once you understand the behaviors, motivators, and work styles, you will know where it's going to be easy to change the culture with technology and where it's tougher. So certain people are born and psychologically and work in ways that lead them to being better in remote work. Other people, not so much. For instance, finance and accounting has a very different culture at a company, no matter what company you're at, than the sales team. And the marketing team has a different culture. So imagine for somebody, one person or a team, let's say they have a culture in marketing where they're really outgoing. That's a behavioral trait. They're in their motivations, they're motivated by helping and belonging each other on kind of cross-functional marketing whiteboard projects, right? And being in the room and ideation, right? And maybe their work styles is that they like structure and predictability. Well, that population that I just described of an outgoing behavioral team, a motivated by helping and belonging with a work style of structure and predictability, they will fail miserably if they're just told, hey, here's a tool to connect on Slack and a tool for Zoom. That's not enough. And so culture, you need to, for change management to succeed, you need to understand your culture. And to understand your culture, it's not an engagement survey tool. It's a tool like Humantelligence or many others that measure BMW. And once you get that insight, then you can manage through technology and focus on which organizations and parts of the organization need more or less support.
I just want to quickly add to that. I want to quickly add to that, Sean, if I can. I think
yes.
Juan, I completely agree with you. And just to throw one more acronym to the mix, I think when people come to me, especially and they say that they want to get this done, I think the approach which I follow is to not talk about the KPI, but to talk about the OKR. And not a lot of people know what is OKR. OKR essentially is objectives and key results, which essentially is defining what the framework needs to be to get you to measuring what needs to be the key performance indicator. So I think that's something which is so key over here, because that kind of dovetails into the change management point, which you so very well elucidated over here, is to kind of know exactly what is it that you're trying to achieve, know your objectives and key results, because without that, you're going to be in an endless loop to figure out solutions because things are changing so fast.
So we've got a couple of questions coming in on this. One is, Juan, can you reiterate what BMW stands for?
Yes, B is for behaviors. You probably know many tools out there such as DISC, Predictive Index, Strength Finders, Gallup, Berkman, Caliper, Humantelligence. They all measure behaviors. M from BMW is the motivators, what drives one's behaviors. This is really under the iceberg. Now, whereas behavioral tools that I mentioned are easy, quick, and cheap, the motivator tools, unfortunately, have often been kept just for executives. Cost a lot of money, take workshops, take an hour. Those would be things like Hogan, some of the SHL tools. Now, Humantelligence is a lot cheaper and quicker. That's my one plug today, to do that piece as well. And then the third thing is W, the way things get done or work styles of a person, a team, a group, a division, or a company. Those are truly the culture of your company. And that is the same definition that Burson by Deloitte defines culture, same definition as Katzenbach Center of Culture at PwC. So I'm not here trying to tell you that I know culture better than others. I've just done all the research and built a company over 6 years following 2 companies that have a lot of smart people who have defined it. I've just built the first software company to measure it. But those are the 3 areas that every company should understand, not just also to adapt to a remote work culture, but let's say a company, a sales organization is going from the year 2000 to the new decade where it was kind of the sales profile, pat on the back, play golf, personal, and then Salesforce CRM came around where you needed a culture of doing work with new solutions and technology and working with digital and being self-reliant. A complete culture change for the sales organization, no matter what the culture of the company is and the products they make. Sales organization from 2000 2008 was transformed by Salesforce and CRM products. My startup, for instance, we didn't have to change so much for remote work and COVID, because we've been working remote for 6 years. But when we started, we had a culture of BMW, B being very change-oriented, M being motivated by innovation, and W by creative things. We came out with amazing products. After 4 years, about 2 years ago, we hit a wall. We weren't growing. The reason is we needed to change our strategy to be a more scalable company without doing things as one-off, so that we had one invoice, one PowerPoint, one message. We could do training with 100 customers instead of doing one-on-one training. And so it necessitated a completely new culture. And so we were succeeding. We didn't wait to fail, but if we hadn't changed to a more predictive, cautious organization with a very different culture, both changing the people there and hiring for new people that fit that BMW framework, we would have never gotten to where we are today. So all of you should always think about this model of changing culture. With any change in strategy, there's a change in culture. Yes, remote work and COVID forced you to, but this is a great insight for all long-term leaders, CIOs and CEOs, that strategy changes, which necessitates a change in culture.
Yeah, and I think certainly with the way COVID has dramatically forced companies to adopt virtual collaboration software, or what we at Bluescape call virtual workspaces, or virtual work platform, excuse me. Just because you move to a technology doesn't mean that people are going to use it. So the BMW, I think, is a really great model to be able to help ensure that the investment in these technologies and these tools, you're increasing the adoption rate of them, because just because technology is available doesn't mean it's going to be used, and we need to make sure that the CIO and his or her team can put into place those practices that help increase that adoption rate. Some of these tools like Bluescape and some of these other big enterprise tools, there's some learning there, and we want to make sure, we need to make sure the CIOs are prepping their workforce for that. This actually raises the next question. When we think about technology, it's obviously a major driver of change within a company. And as we've been talking about, the CIO, and Tejas, you were just mentioning this, really needs to work closely with the CHRO, or at least the whomever is the lead in HR, that they need to work more closely than ever before, right? But this also requires a mindset shift, even a skill set shift for CIOs. You know, if some are more accustomed to the way things used to be, right? CIOs just focus on the technology. Now we're saying CIOs need to be able to focus on technology as well as the human element as it relates to, you know, what those tech implementations are. Tejas, what do you see, you know, the CIO skill sets and mindsets need to be that will position them for success, you know, as we go into 2021, as well as, you know, let's just say in the next 5 years?
So I think the biggest, you know, the biggest change I would say in the last few months has been the rise of, I mean, what's old is new in a way, but the rise of written communication in a way that we have never seen before. And what I mean by that really is it's more and more important to be able to communicate exactly what you're saying without having to, you know, the need to kind of, you know, go to a room and have a quick meeting. You're not always afforded that luxury. And that's a big change. I mean, especially when you think of tech people, you're used to dealing with you know, ticketing systems, bug tracking software, things like Basecamp, or, you know, other tools which are very transactional in nature, where you will get a ticket which will be a severity 1 to 5, and it will have a deadline, and it's a very request response kind of a model. And people have had to move away from that, because you need to show more or higher EQ in order to deal with situations which are unfolding. Because a lot of times the colleague or the employee is really struggling to even get to a point of, you know, say connecting via VPN, or, you know, opening up their Cisco AnyConnect, or things which are very, very table stakes for IT leaders, which they wouldn't have to deal with if the employee was on-prem, right? Because if an employee is on-prem, it becomes that much easier because they're already on a fixed, you know, infrastructure. So I think that is the bigger change which IT leaders are going to have to sustain moving into 2021 and beyond, is to still be very strong communicators with a high level of empathy and a high level of EQ. Because that's what's going to help foster the relationships. You really want to have employees reach out to the IT leaders. You want them to reach out, because that's the only way you're going to have increase in productivity. And so, without kind of, you know, sounding cliched, you got to be able to like your CIO. You really got to be able to like him or her. If you don't like them, then chances are you will be hesitant to reach out to them. And that is going to affect your productivity and going to severely affect it. In the olden times, and when I say olden times, like 10 months ago, that probably wasn't as much a factor, because you had a base level, you had a ground zero below which you couldn't fall, because there were safeguards in place. You already are on the network, you can already access certain things, you can already do certain things. But we have had people move entire countries, sometimes entire cities, states, whatever. They're going to a new place. They are working with internet connections which may not always be as stable. They are working with systems which may not be as stable as what you would provide out of the box. So the role of CIO really is dealing with all of that. So everything which is, you still have to be very tech focused, obviously, but that's kind of table stakes. What's more important now is to be able to really be able to communicate with the colleague, with the employee, to assure them that you're there for them, and really be able to foster that relationship on a more one-on-one basis, as opposed to going from a ticketing software.
I think the point about it being less transactional, more kind of relationship driven is an important one. Juan, what would you add?
Tejas and Sean, you won't believe this, but what Tejas just said about IT executives, CIOs, and I would add even all the ones below them, so every level of IT, right? Even your entry-level engineers, programmers, who are all about the 20-character, you know, chat and the 20-character Twitter, okay? Higher EQ. IQ of tech people is through the roof, we all know that. self-development, self-awareness, which then leads to understanding others and how to relate and get higher resonance and collaboration, especially remote, because you can't go to their desk, okay? That is the next frontier for technologists, is the EQ. And interestingly, and I don't kid you not, Dice.com, the #1 job board in the world for technology roles, their whole 2021 campaign and marketing is all around, don't just find a job, find a career through understanding yourself and learning the soft skills of communication and connection. The largest job board in the world is actually putting in place a whole program of educating all the registered users at Dice.com, and they have a new career development page, which ironically, the self-awareness and EQ tool they have there is the Humantelligence tool. So I wasn't going to bring that up today, but because Tejas so eloquently described this key need of having a higher EQ, these are the tools like Humantelligence and job boards that both low-level, mid, and senior execs and CIOs will need. That's first and foremost. There are two areas I think that new skills and mindsets have to be applied. In the short term for COVID-19's impact on 2020 and 2021, again, it's change management. Won't go more into that. We've already discussed it. Second is, again, improving the process of evaluating technologies, putting them, testing them without spending a lot of money, and then getting them up and running and being able to change quickly. That's, I think, short term. Now, to the question, that same question applied to 5 to 10 years out, I think it's different. The most important thing when we get through COVID that every CIO should be thinking about today is data and data analytics. Many of you, if not most of you, have already hired data analytics people in your teams. Your companies might have hired a kind of VP of data or even a chief data officer. The power in technology in the 60s, 70s, and 80s was around being a CIO. And it was really just enabling and supporting your internal stakeholders at the company. Then companies, all of them, whether it's a consumer products company, a retail company, restaurant company, you needed technology to interface 24/7 with the outside world. CIOs became CTOs. It used to be a CTO title was only for technology companies. Now you have CTOs at restaurant companies because just being a CIO isn't enough. However, that's going to be eclipsed over the next 10 years by chief data officers. As a headhunter, when I was working at Heidrick & Struggles and Korn Ferry as a partner, and then my own search firm as a partner focused on CIOs, I started to see this trend where many of these large companies weren't looking for CIOs. They were looking for chief data officers. So I think there's a risk for current CIOs that if they don't become experts in data, they will be eclipsed by chief data officers, because a lot of these technologies, if you do your job right as a CTO, you're actually eliminating yourself and the need for a CTO if you put in the right process, systems, and technologies to get you for the next 5 years. The real value in understanding consumers, understanding decisions around pricing, product, all the marketing decisions are going to be coming out of data, which should now be run by IT as a chief data officer. All the operational decisions on manufacturing sites and how best to run supply chain and move products around the world, and technology companies and how best to service your customers, again, out of technology. The CTO, if they're going to be effective, need to become chief data officers, and I really believe that chief data officers in the next 5 years will eclipse and become the most important role at large organizations with a lot of data. Data will become king, and so will the CDO over the CTO, and this is something you should all be aware of. And then the last thing is, for consumer-oriented companies, the blur between a marketing department and an IT department is disappearing, okay? Every company is having this struggle in IT with, we need to go digital, so we have the head of digital. But every marketing company needs to go digital and connect with consumers digitally. They have a head of digital. And so there's this fight right now on who really owns digital. Is it the marketing people who are the strategy and the roadmap people, and then tell technology people what technology to support that? Or like many companies are realizing, no, this is too complex. You need the technology people to do the strategy roadmap and the marketing people then to use that platform. This is converging, just like sales and marketing has converged as well with demand gen. So that's another trend in the next 5 years, that if you're a CIO or CTO, even CDO, where does digital and digital marketing interface? How do you manage that? Because it's complex and it doesn't live by the siloed worlds of this is my functional area, that's yours. So that's another big trend in the next 5 years that CIOs should be aware of.
I would like to underscore the point which Juan mentioned about data, and I think that's a very important point. The transition from CIO to CTO to CDO. And I think I want to quote Daniel Pink on this, where everything has kind of gone from access to curation. So what do I mean by that, right? So in the olden days, and again, when I keep saying olden days, it's not that old, it's not ancient, it's still older than what it is right now. And access was something which was CIO's domain, where you could shut someone off and you could really say that, oh, you're not going to get this, it's going to take this much time. Or now, you literally can execute a lot of those operations at the click of a button. So in many ways, to Juan's point, CIOs are kind of cannibalizing their own role through the adoption of technology and applications, which are powerful course right now. But what's the next frontier really is, how do you curate all of this? How do you help someone make sense of this? And data is obviously the largest conduit to make sense of it. And how do you really curate this information for your C-suite? So when it comes to your CEO or other members of the C-suite, maybe your innovation officers for that matter, how do you curate this information so that then they can apply that to different business cases? So it really, again, to quote Daniel Pink, it's from access to curation. That's the sweet spot where the CDO will play in the next 5 years, because he or she will be able to make sense of these different data streams to really inform the clients, the use cases, and the business cases for the next 5 to 10 years.
There's a lot on the CIO's shoulder, isn't there?
Yeah.
Lots of change. Yeah, lots of not just changes within what's happening in the marketplace or tech advances or what's happening socially that's causing companies to pivot, i.e. COVID. They too need to shift how they support the organization. We've got a couple of different questions coming in that I want to get to in a moment, but we've been talking about the CIO's skill set shifts and what they need to do, and one of those that we mentioned was really around aligning the CEO, making sure that he or she is aligning the business goals with the tech investments. And a question came in that is, Tejas, I think I'm going to direct to you, is so this is actually kind of going down another layer here. How can the CIO align all the work of employees with organizational objectives during an ongoing COVID-19 crisis? I mean, if you think about it, it's when we're in person somewhere, it's a little bit easier. I don't want to say it's easier. It's a little bit easier to make sure people are aware of, okay, here's where we're going as an organization. These are our goals. These are our objectives. Here's how we're doing, et cetera, et cetera. That's never been easy, right? Well, now we add COVID and it's even harder now. So any tips, advice, maybe things that you're doing or that you're seeing being done that can help the CIO make sure employees are aligned with organizational objectives during these kind of strange times?
I mean, I think again, kind of going on the theme of what's old is new. One of the biggest aha moments for me personally from the crisis really was how online learning really had its big moment. Everyone switched to online learning. You have things like Masterclass, Udemy, Coursera, LinkedIn Learning. There's just like people are ravenous to learn more and more things. People are making bread and doing all of those things. And what we're seeing is that the consumption of online video and courses in particular is on the rise. So something which we have done organizationally is that we have actually introduced more courses online. So for things where people would have actually had classroom training, we are pushing out more courses online and giving people access to these learning services so they can kind of self-learn. And that has really worked because people are already in that mindset that you're going to have to learn things, and to provide them on a platform which they are now getting more and more used to. I read somewhere that Apple Podcasts is like the top listening platform right now, ahead of Spotify in some cases for podcasts. So things like that, where people are already like using these self-help or self-learning tools. I think facilitating the flow of information through them, I think, has helped us and has helped a lot of our clients also in this space where you can no longer really have a session where you're bringing in everyone, because people are no longer available at the same time. People work different hours. There's a time management aspect to it. There is an adaptability aspect to it. So why not decentralize this information, information communication through these learning channels? And we have used the technologies like Microsoft Stream, and we have kind of been innovative about it to kind of have, if someone wants to skip to their part, you can have timestamps. So very much like a Udemy or a Coursera kind of format for organizational strategy. So I think that's the kind of approach which I think has worked for us, and something which, if people haven't been doing that and have been relying solely on Zoom sessions or webinars to kind of do that, they should definitely consider switching to it and see the effect, because people are really receptive to it accordingly.
Nice, nice. So basically, for those skill sets that are necessary for digital transformation or being successful in working remotely, online learning is a great opportunity for people to be doing that, even though they can't be, maybe participating in those classes that might be offered at HQ or where it might be. The other thing that I would just add, if I take my facilitator hat off for a second, a key thing that we talk about at Bluescape is, how do we ensure not just the leadership team, but the organization has insights into kind of where the company is going and how the company is performing against plan and whatnot. And using virtual work platforms that allow for people to synchronously and asynchronously get information, whether it be, at Bluescape, we'll do town halls where people can hear what's going on, and those town halls are delivered through our virtual work platform at Bluescape. And if people who can't make those town halls, all that content is readily available within a workspace, so people can come and get it whenever they need to. So I think, looking at synchronous and asynchronous technologies to help people stay informed of what's going on in the business, what the objectives are, what the goals are, is a key and important way, especially in these distributed times when people are working remotely. And as we talked about earlier, I think Juan made the point, some companies aren't going to go back to a on-site, right? It's going to be hybrid, or in some cases, wholly remote, right? All right. So we're kind of approaching the last the last 10 minutes, and we've got another question that I think is probably a great kind of entree into the last question that I have, which is kind of more broader around digital transformation trends in 2021. But one of our participants asked for more information about breaking silos. Silos is always, I don't know that they can ever be busted, but we certainly have a layer of complexity when we're really not able to see each other. So Juan, I'm curious, any thoughts that you have around what CIOs or frankly other executives can do to help facilitate breaking those silos down?
Yeah, I think most connection to work together and collaborate to solve complex problems happens top down, right? Leader with their team, Monday quarterback meeting, whether it's in the office or remote. And then within a company, you often at the middle level, you have cross-functional meetings for projects already defined. I think now CIOs need to be more aggressive to push an agenda of cross-functional work and have standing weekly meetings with the other functional heads that they most often will need to work together. So sales and marketing are the two that come to mind as the most evident, right? You cannot be successful in sales today without software. That's why Salesforce is now like whatever, $3 billion revenue company. And you can't be successful in marketing without digital marketing, which takes digital technology to support it. And so instead of just hoping that the younger or the mid-level managers go out and talk with each other, it should be part of a weekly process where you have at the executive sponsor level, CIO, CMO, and CIO and Chief Sales Officer, separate meetings, going through and working on what it is that their teams are working on together. If you don't do that, there's going to be a lot of conflict and a lot of finger pointing. And it's not just on a weekly basis, out of the blue reactive. It starts with the strategic plan for the year that most companies start doing in December through January and get approved in February. That business planning process that often has been done, where I worked at Procter & Gamble, you have the objectives, goals, strategies, and measures. Each function did their own. We were in marketing, brand management, we did our own. That process should be done between sales and CIO together, between marketing and CIO together, and possibly even all three, to look at what is the strategy for the year, how does that impact our functional areas, and how does technology work infused within us to enable that, and make decisions early on strategically, and then have weekly follow-up meetings. That would be a huge ask, and if an organization can do that, they're doing the first great step, because you have to assume that if there is a leader in sales, a leader in IT, CIO, and a leader in marketing, once they get in the room, they'll figure out the best strategy, process, and tactical plan. I'm not worried about that. It's actually getting the right touch points at the right times in the year and at a cadence where they can react and adapt if there's a change during the year, which is the bigger challenge, because people are so siloed and not used to working that way, quite frankly.
Yeah. Tejas, anything you would add around some of the silos and how to bust them?
I think Juan covered a lot of things which I think are par for the course at this point, because you can't have these big meetings where you just won't be able to communicate as well to everyone. Everyone might not be available at the same time. What we have tried to do on our end is really have these one-on-one discussions on a more granular basis. So having micro meetings. So if you really want to have a conversation, rather than having a group meeting, having these 15-minute check-ins, which could be your scrum calls, which could be your daily stand-up meetings. And what we have really seen is like a reduction in the time which you would typically spend for scrum, and focusing more on individual meetings has helped drive up the productivity, because traditional scrum calls used to happen you have a whiteboard, you have a few stickies, you start doing the scrum session, and you know who is going to get what. That has obviously changed. And now, in order to kind of work with people all of whom are not really happy working remotely, like there are a few people who are not happy working remotely, so you've got to spend extra time with them to kind of understand their needs and kind of work with them, as opposed to kind of bucketing everyone in the same bucket like everyone is remote. So that's one way to kind of really break down those silos, because those people are also those who won't proactively communicate to you the issues that they are facing, and will essentially be the bottleneck when it comes to delivery. So preemptively kind of addressing those issues with these micro meetings, with these mini scrum calls, if you may want to call that, is something which we have been experimenting with successfully. And it's also something which it works, because you would much rather have these smaller meetings rather than the big one where someone is going to be silent all the time without the camera on, because they don't want to come on camera, they don't want to speak up.
Yeah. Well, and certainly with those type of meetings, a Zoom call can get a little bit tedious, especially if we've been in them all day. And that's where kind of virtual collaboration software like Bluescape can certainly help with that, because you can do those meetings virtually, synchronously, and make sure that those lessons are being learned as it goes, and help kind of lower the barrier or the walls that create those silos, right? By creating more awareness and understanding across the organization. All right, so we're moving into the kind of the final few minutes here, and we've been looking at some of the big trends around digital transformation, obviously the hybrid workforce and the technology that needs to fuel it, the CIO's responsibility around change, the CIO's own transformational growth in terms of skill sets and mindsets. And then we also hit on employees, right? And what employees need to be looking at in terms of their own skill sets in the context of digital transformation and distributed workforce. You mentioned emotional intelligence. I think both of you really resonated with that and believe that's a really important piece. And underneath emotional intelligence is a whole host of other skill sets, right? That we could probably do a whole nother webinar on. However, we don't have that kind of time. So, digital transformation is a pretty big topic, whether it be AI, whether it be virtual reality, robotics, machine learning, data, which Juan you were hitting on pretty in your conversation just a few minutes ago. But I'm just thinking in the last 2 minutes that we have here before we have some wrap-up pieces for everyone, as we move into 2021, what other trends are shaping the CIO's agenda for change? Tejas, you want to kind of start us off on that?
Sure. So I think you're right, and that there are so many trends out there. I don't think we have like 4 minutes. So what I want to kind of encapsulate those under or into is just in general, knowing that you have to support many different systems as opposed to supporting one. So an example of that really would be KPMG did a survey, I think a few months ago, where they asked consumers if you were to contact an organization, which channel would you choose? Now, traditionally, those channels were you would physically visit the location to ask a question, or you would call the location, or you would email them. Those three were like the typical channels. Now it has grown to messengers, web apps, web chat, you name it, voice. So all of these are channels which are now grown, and moving into the post-corona era, these channels are going to stay. They're going to be sticky. So now what happens is the companies who are treating this as, oh, well, we don't need to invest in voice, or we don't need to invest in AR, we don't need to invest. All of those investments are now going to become table stakes. So if you did not have if you don't have a digital assistant, it's going to make you look like you have a deficiency as opposed to it being a nice to have. Because if you don't have a digital assistant, people who are now attuned to kind of communicating for those transactional queries are going to be hesitant to call someone to ask those transactional queries. So a part of customer service has been actually transformed already into the digital assistant aspect, and it's no longer where people are frustrated with digital assistant. It's because they're seeing the value. You have companies like Microsoft teaming up with the CDC to produce the coronavirus symptoms chatbot, or you have the WHO investing in chatbots. So even things like chatbot, which were thought of as a hobbyist thing, are now becoming more and more mainstream. So how does an organization kind of include all of these new technologies, the likes of voice, messaging, be it through digital text messaging or through a chatbot, and you name it. I mean, there are other technologies which would be added to this. How do you really truly become digital ready for 2021 is the bigger question here. Technology kind of becomes agnostic at that point. It's more about how best can you serve these customers who have now all of a sudden discovered these different entry points. So if your competitor has them and you don't, you are going to be, customers are going to be siphoned off because they don't want to engage, or at least a big chunk of them do not want to engage with you in the traditional ways of engagement.
Yeah, good. So, and how those all work together is also key. Juan, any last thoughts on this before we start to wrap it up?
Yeah, just 3 things. The world of IT is moving more and more to best of breed versus one-stop shop. And sure, Salesforce and Oracle and Workday can keep buying lots of technologies, but they're not going to be able to buy quickly enough. CIOs need to be able to understand all the multiple of technology that are coming out. So it's become more best of breed thinking. However, these things have to talk to each other. They need to integrate. So understanding the integration of all these. Why? Because data, right? Best of breed. Data is king. If you have best of breed, and one of the reasons people do one-stop shop is because it makes the data management easier, but then you're not going to be able to support your organization as well or customers. So there's this catch-22. The more best of breed you go, the harder it is for data to go across, but that will be key if you can do those 2 things. And then thirdly, to manage that entire process, agile technology roadmaps, applying the agile methodology to identifying technologies, evaluating them, trying them, and scrub and rinse and trying it again every month, every couple months. It sounds exhausting, but I'm sure you guys can all do it.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for your time today. So we do have a poll question. So Vanessa, if you can launch it, I don't see it on my end. It's a quick poll question, really around, if there's, we've talked a lot about different things around technology as well as culture change. So we just have a quick poll here for you. Just also as a reminder, first of all and foremost, thank you, Tejas. Thank you, Juan, for your time today. It really is, we appreciate you making the time. It's a hard time to make time to do these sort of things, especially at year end. So making the time to do this and share your wisdom we really greatly appreciate it. So thank you, gentlemen. Also, everyone, please know that if you couldn't stay for the whole thing, we will have the recording coming to you as well as the handouts if you didn't get a chance to download them. So it looks like the poll is in progress. So as that wraps up, we will certainly end the session here today. Again, thank you, everyone, for your time. Juan, Tejas, thank you.
Thank you.
I can't see you right now, so I hope that you can hear me at least.
Yes.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Bye.
All right. Thank you, Juan. Thanks,
you,
everyone.
Have a good day. Bye.
Happy holidays.